Welcome to the Conversations Across the Grand Canyon podcast, aka The Big Gap. Here, our purpose will be to explore the impacts of social, political, and economic issues through the lens of generational and cultural differences. Good day, listeners. Welcome to the Big Gap podcast. I'm your host, Big Al Perry, also known as the Sonic Boomer.
Okay, Boomer. Okay.
I'm recording this podcast exactly 1 week after Super Bowl 60, the NFL championship game between the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots. I had a particular interest in this game because the last time these two teams met in the Super Bowl, it was a disastrous result for one of the teams, namely the Seattle Seahawks, who were coached by Pete Carroll and had a marvelous regular season. And had one of the, like this year's Super Bowl, that team also had a fantastic defensive unit. They were nicknamed the Legion of Boom. The defense, like this past Super Bowl, carried the team. They were dominant in all aspects: defensive line, linebacking core, and the defensive backfield. It was a competitive game back then. Coach Carroll had his team ready to play. Bill Belichick was equally as proficient. And it came down to, in the fourth quarter, at the goal line with the Seahawks on offense, they had methodically went down the field and got to the goal line and kind of forgot their identity. And the result was one of the most egregious offensive play calls on the goal line in the history of the Super Bowl, if not in the history of professional football itself. Not going to go into too much detail. No matter what generation you are, you probably saw either highlights or you saw it live on TV back when the game was played. Highlights of that particular play have been nearly exhausted. Leading up to the Super Bowl, we saw it over and over again. And so Super Bowl 60, this matchup, it was sort of karmic in a way. And that what held my interest to see this particular matchup play out. Given this year's Seahawks team with their excellent defense, the best defense in the league, going against a very young quarterback who, even though he came through the playoffs, the team, the Patriots, came through the playoffs to reach the Super Bowl, that team didn't play particularly well on offense. So all the pundits casual fans were kind of expecting the result that we saw last Sunday. A dominating defense that, again, carried the day. There was another thing about the lead up to the Super Bowl. The week before the Super Bowl game was played this past Sunday, there were Hall of Fame votes for the 2026 class for induction into the Hall of Fame. And surprisingly, the coach and the owner of the Patriot dynasty, 6 Super Bowls in 20 years, Bill Belichick and Robert Kraft, the owner, on successive days were denied entry into the Hall of Fame. And I was shocked, like most people, to see that result. And it makes you wonder why. What was the reasoning behind the most successful NFL franchise in Super Bowl era history being denied in that manner? I suspect it came down to personality instead of on the field play. It came down to certain voters probably having an animus toward Bill Belichick and his coaching, let's say, administration, that they were prone to, well, to put it bluntly, they were cheaters. They were part of 2 scandals. One was called Spygate, in which Bill Belichick employed staff to videotape practices surreptitiously entering the opposition stadiums or practice facilities and stealing signals and play calls that he would then use to gain an advantage in the actual game being played. There was also another scandal in which the football air pressure was being manipulated at the direction of Tom Brady to get a better grip on the football in inclement weather and whatnot. One of the things I think that was being held against the Patriots during those scandals were they were caught, they were fined, they lost draft picks, and after that Spygate resolution, they were caught again. A repeat offender. Now, I'm not saying that Bill Belichick was the only person engaging in that type of thing, but to be caught, be adjudged guilty, to have the arrogance to repeat offend is what I think those Hall of Fame voters were looking at when they said we're not going to reward a first ballot entry into this revered institution. There need to be more consequence to their actions than what had already been done to them. So that was an interesting week and lead up to the Super Bowl. And the other issue with the Super Bowl, well, as far as the lead up to the Super Bowl, was the backlash to the halftime Super Bowl performer. From the time that Bad Bunny, the Puerto Rican Latin musical performer, was chosen, the backlash was almost instantaneous. He wasn't American enough, even though he's an American citizen. He didn't represent the American ideal, which I'm always kind of perplexed by. That attitude that you need to be some kind of, or the American populace needs to embrace this monolithic ideal of what it means to be a citizen in this country. The Trump administration and his allies, the MAGA crowd, if you will, even in his first administration, this war on diversity, equality, and inclusion has been just relentless. Sometimes it just feels like the Trump administration policies and actions are guided by the specter of white supremacy. It's kind of hard for me to say that type of thing because he does have prominent Jewish members of his administration, senior advisors. And he or the administration is not as diverse. It doesn't seem as his first administration. This administration is not as diverse. But there are times when this divide in the nation seems to go to some ridiculous extremes. Because of the backlash against Bad Bunny, there was even a alternative halftime or show. Uh, I didn't see it. I didn't even try to look for it. I can't remember if it was the day of the Super Bowl or the day before, but there was some stadium or venue in which I think it was Kid Rock. I'm not sure, and some other artists gave a performance in contrast to what was going to be uh, Bad Bunny's superb performance at halftime during Super Bowl 60. Let me make this one perfectly clear. Bad Bunny gave a superlative halftime show. I guess I'll use the word a docu musical instead of a documentary. He gave a docu musical performance. Even though I could not understand a single word or the lyrics were all in Spanish, the video, the camera work, the videography, the production was first rate. The dancers, the setting, the sets, the props, it all documented perfectly Bad Bunny's culture, his love of country, the love of his homeland of Puerto Rico. He took us on a personal history tour of his country, his neighborhood, his upbringing, and we all saw it kind of play out in like 20 minutes, in which I know I was, and I'm sure a lot of other people were just simply mesmerized by the story he told in that 20, 25 minutes. And a lot of it kind of highlighted the colonialist attitude of America or the United States towards Puerto Rico. We all know the damage that colonialism did to the world. A lot of the issues in the Near East, the Middle East, and Africa were aggravated, indeed initiated, by Western powers colonizing so much of those places I just mentioned, creating unnatural borders, separating people from their ancestral lands, their migratory and trade routes, the exploitation of people and their mineral riches, and not to mention the slave trade and all that what came from that. Indeed, most of the problems that we see in between Israel and the Palestinians, between Pakistan, Indonesia, India, and the issues closer to home, the issues in Puerto Rico, are all has its roots in colonialism. One of the impactful things I saw during Bad Bunny's performance is when the farmers were climbing the power poles. And you see the sparks of the transformers blowing up, and all of that highlighted their or the issues with their electrical grid system. And that issue has been going on for decades. And we treat this U.S. territory and those people like second class citizens. And that is what Bad Bunny was trying to get across. Yes, we have our own culture. Yes, the language is, let's say, predominantly, Spanish, but, English is the official language, I imagine, but they feel isolated. They don't feel a full part of the American experience because of this colonialist attitude that we take toward them. So I commend Bad Bunny for what he showed us and what he presented to us. It was entertaining, even without understanding the lyrics or of what he was saying. I was able to follow along with it. I was able to get a glimpse of his culture, of his people, of of his of his neighborhood. So this divide that we seemingly can't get past in America, it just seems so arbitrary and pernicious. And it just saddens me to see how diversity, equality, and inclusion is somehow seen to be an enemy of the American populace. The sad fact is this: because of this attitude that a large majority of, I'm not going to say a majority, but a large segment of the white population seems to agree with this notion that only the white culture, English speaking culture, it is the only one that has merit, and we should lend credence to. You know, a majority of people of color will probably always be a bit wary of the social and political and economic motives of the white majority in the United States. I think that's a I think that's a fact of life. We're always going to look at the motives of the white populace with suspicion, talking about people of color. You know, it's kind of funny. Our Constitution, it talks about an even more perfect union. Even before that, during the Articles of Confederation, our first quote unquote Constitution, it talked about a perpetual union. Article 13 in the Articles of Confederation. And the word perpetual means permanent, eternal, lasting forever. And some of the delegates during that time in the 1700s, after the Civil War, after the Revolutionary War, after we won and we set up a doctrine, a legal document to govern this newly independent country. The Articles of Confederation was a precursor to our current Constitution. And like I said, it talked about a perpetual union. And some of those delegates even used the word indivisible, which is an antonym or its opposite of divided. Indivisible is a word that you don't hear often. It's not really used commonly in everyday, speaking or in the English language. But it's prominent during our school days, our early school days, and shoot. I go to my commission meetings here in Twiggs County, and it starts off with the Pledge of Allegiance, in which that word is emphasized, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Indivisible. So this division that we seem to find ourselves in at certain times in our history, certain crucial times in our history, like the Civil War. Our Constitution says that once you are a citizen, once you are admitted into this union, once you are granted the privilege to become a state in this union, there's no going back. This union is a perpetual union. It is indivisible. The very first paragraph in our Constitution of the United States, ratified in 1787, in the very first sentence of the very first paragraph, it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." I'll stop right there. In order to form a more perfect union. More perfect. People, what is more perfect than indivisible? What is more perfect than perpetual? Our Constitution says it's unbreakable, unshakable, eternal, lasting forever. Once you join this club, just like the original 13 states, once you join this club, there's no turning back. You are obligated to follow the Constitution and all of the laws that arise thereof. More perfect. So I'm going to end on this and let you ruminate on this. This so-called divided nation that we currently living in, it probably couldn't be more divided than it was back in 1860 when the Civil War began. And all of those states that succeeded from the Union, the leadership of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, all of the governors of the states that seceded from the Union, and the executive staff of those states, many of the legislatures of those states that succeeded, and the military leadership of the Confederacy, particularly the ones that graduated from West Point. When they took up arms against the United States, and when they seceded from the Union, according to the Constitution, they broke from that more perfect union. And what they did was an act of sedition, and they were rightly labeled as traitors. And like I said, particularly the ones who graduated from the military leadership who graduated from West Point, because they took an oath to that Constitution. To defend that Constitution. But as divided as we were back then, we were able to move past it. Not without trials and tribulations that last to this day. Not without the stench still carrying, wafting on the wind over all this time. So keep that in mind. This divide that we are going through right now, politically, socially, it's going to do some damage. Probably some long lasting damage, just like the Civil War did. But that document, that Constitution of the United States of America, that laid out a government by the people for the people, it has the strength to keep us from dissolving into tyranny and totalitarianism. So I'm hopeful and I'm blessed to live in a country that has the means and the wherewithal to come through any crisis and come out the other side a little bit better than before. Thank you for listening. And I hope that my words are prophetic. I hope that we really are going to realize the error of our ways that we're currently living in, politically and socially. We have an obligation to do better. And I'm reasonably confident that we will. Thank you, listeners. And until next time, this is Big Al Perry. Conversations across the Grand Canyon, the Big Gap. Thank you.